card does explain the card, but not its implications. Because when it comes to competitive Magic, there's a lot of clear defined rules as to how we interact and move through phases. Heck, a lot of people tend to take advantage of that through asking questions, wasting time, rules luring, all that stuff. But more specifically, when it comes to abusing information, things are a little bit more clear if you take a look at the Oracle text for cards. That's where it's really important for control effects, specifically Mindslaver effects that take control of your opponent. There are a list of things that you can and can't do. And in today's video, I wanted to go over a very specific ruling that honestly seems intuitive, but you may never have been aware of around Mindslaver effects, and then ultimately go over all 7 of those effects that exist in Magic, rating them from their constructed and commander viability, and maybe just make you aware of honestly 2 of them that you've probably never really thought of. You have to start off by defining what this effect is though, starting from the iconic Mindslaver card, 6 mana for a legendary artifact, 4 tap it, sacrifice Mindslaver. You control that player during their next player's turn. And so this is a great way to abuse your opponent's turn and use up their resources, but that might not be something that comes first to mind to a lot of players. For many constructed players, I think once I eventually go down my list at the end of the video, you will probably recognize numbers 1 through 3, but I think a lot of players might not actually know some of the lower power ones, and a lot of commander players, again, just because there's only 7 of them, may not have ever come across cards like this, especially in terms of mass play. So I wanted to use this video to not only go over this effect, but talk about what we should be doing when we take control of an opponent, go over the ruling that kind of inspired this video, and then ultimately rank those cards. So what do you do when you come across a scenario where you get to take control of your opponent? Because there actually is one card where another player can give you control of someone else's turn. So in that case, even if you don't control someone's turn yourself, you can do so through the use of someone else's nonsense. So how do you min-max that? How do you take up their resources? Firstly, let's say you cast something like Emrakul the Promised Land. This is probably the most common take control effect that I think a lot of players have come across, outside of Mindslaver being the iconic one. There probably is one more for the constructed players out there, but Emrakul the Promised Land, a 13 mana for a 13/13 legendary creature Eldrazi. This spell costs 1 less to cast for each card type among cards in your graveyard, so it actually can be pretty reduced, pretty reasonable in Eldrazi decks as well and other colorless strategies. When you cast this spell, you gain control of target opponent during that player's next turn, and then after that turn, that player takes an extra turn. It has flying, trample, and protection from instants. So traditionally, kind of has that protection from Path to Exile, Swords to Plowshares, maybe in older formats. But the key to this card, and I think the thing that it really teaches, is that not only do you take control of that player during their next turn, they still get a turn after that. So you don't just like get them to skip their whole turn. You have to min-max that scenario to the point where they are untapping to very minimal resources or just a very constricted board state. And that is what I really like about Emrakul the Promised Land. So let's say you cast this, you take control of your opponent. What do you do before you get to their next turn? Firstly, you're going to try and get as much information as possible, so you have access to all zones that player can see in game. So that is face down cards on the field that have morph. If you have something like a Prophet of Kruphix that allows you to take a look at the top of your deck, or any other effect that lets you, I believe like Realm Walker is another one, that lets you look at the top of the deck, take a look at that as well. So all of these different effects that are kind of face down and available to that player, take a look, take that information, because even if you're not able to use those cards to your advantage, you at least know what your opponent's going to do on their turn, or at least maybe if they have a card draw spell or something that you can't ultimately take advantage of that gets them that card, then you know what to look out for. Then also you want to be using up as much removal as possible. So a lot of times they might have maybe lightning bolts or other pieces that interact with your board to interact with their board. And what I like about cards like Fatal Push is that it doesn't really regard itself for a legal target. You know what, I'm being a little confusing here. It doesn't require any condition. It can just target something. That's really what I mean here. So destroy target creature if it has mana value 2 or less. So you could just point it at something and then it will just destroy it regardless or not. It just casts the spell, it gets it out of their hand, and that's the key to cards like this. A lot of times, like, this is a great like Pyroblast versus like Red Elemental Blast example. One of them makes it so you can only target or destroy the spell if it's blue, and one of them says you destroy it if it's blue. And so there's a big difference to that. One of them makes it so the card has to start off as blue to target it, but then the other one makes it so you can target it and then the effect happens if it's blue, and it's key to getting cards out of your hand. For many of you constructed players out there, you understand the difference when you're playing decks with Ensnaring Bridge. It's getting cards out of your hand. You want to get cards low, and so when it comes to effects like that, maybe getting Hellbent and everything too, you want to make it so that you have these cards that are able to play out without condition. And so it's nice when you take advantage of your opponent's turn to use up cards like that and just get it out of their hand. Next up, you want to make bad attacks and or use up sacrifice outlets. So Blood Artist is a great one. So you can then kind of use up Blood Artist's like kind of sacrifice trigger. So this isn't a sack outlets itself, but it's actually a great win condition to just attack into. Whenever this creature or another creature dies, target player loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. So notice how that says target player. You can point it back at the player. You can go neutral on this. You could use a sack outlet out, point Blood Artist at the player that you're controlling, neutral it out, then attack with the Blood Artist, get the win condition out there. You're playing commander, look at someone else and be like, can you block this? I will do something in your favor based on what's in the hand. Bad attacks, use up sack outlets, and take advantage of things like this that say target player, didn't say each opponent, so you are able to then point it back at yourself. And then finally, just tap out their lands. That's it, right? Like something like War's Toll does this inevitably. It's one of my favorite cards to play in red, but in general, just tap out players. That's it. Just use up all their mana, tap it out. In the case of Emrakul the Promised End, of course, that doesn't really make a difference in that sense. Like they still are going to get that turn, but when it comes to other extra turn spells that we are going to come across, or sorry, steal your opponent's turn spells, then tapping them out is going to be the best way to make sure that they don't have the cards they need or the resources they have to play the cards that they have or whatever is left based on what you've left them with in your hand. Obviously, you can just default to just tapping them out, but that's not optimal. You just want to use up their turns unless you have some type of deal going with them in a commander game. Regardless, if you take control of your opponent's turn, if it's not with Emrakul the Promised End, if it's with some type of hard control effect, then you just want to use as much resources as possible when it comes to that. Now, when it comes to rulings, this is the thing that actually inspired the video. It's actually from a great Twitter post here. So from Spencer Envoy Valakut here, friendly reminder that sideboards do not exist inside a game of Magic and are not a searchable zone when you control a player via Emrakul the Promised End. So it says here, actually at the bottom of the Oracle for Emrakul the Promised End, controlling a player doesn't allow you to look at that player's sideboard. If an effect instructs that player to choose a card from outside the game, you can't have that player choose any card. Notice the ruling above that as well. It says, while controlling another player, you can see all cards in the game that player can see. So this is kind of alluding to my information aspect when I was talking about morph cards or taking a look at the top of the deck. This includes cards that are in players' hands, face down cards that player controls, and any card that player in their library that they may look at. So cards like that are available, but in the game is the key, and that's where it kind of leads to that second point. It's kind of intuitive. I don't know if this has actually ever happened. I'm not sure what inspired this tweet. Maybe there is something, but it's actually kind of funny that it needs to be spelled out. I'm actually doing a collab TikTok with Keeping It Casual coming down the line, so look out for that on this specific ruling. But it's just a very funny thing that I imagine has maybe come up somewhere, maybe not in comp REL, but it's also kind of funny because if you come up against a brew and you're just getting desperate, you might try and do this and it's just completely not possible. So it has to be information available within the game. Now, this is Emrakul the Promised End. How does this interact with cards like Wish? So for example, you might be playing Modern Ruby Storm. What happens when you take control of your opponent within Emrakul the Promised End and you go to cast Wish? Nothing happens because you cannot choose cards outside of the game. Those cards do not exist to you. So Wish will only serve to be a wasted card, so you can just play it out so they don't have access to it, which is great. It also increases the storm count by 1. I mean, you're playing Emrakul the Promised End. I don't know why storm count will matter to you as a likely Eldrazi player. Just storm count 1 and you can't look at anything. It's a waste of a card. So it has value in that sense. If you have a Wish and you take it from your opponent, you're playing against Ruby Storm in Modern, I'm pretty sure just wasting the Wish out of their hand has so much value, so just cast it anyway. How does this interact with Karn the Great Creator? Again, going with the idea on its -2 that you may reveal an artifact you own from outside the game or choose a face-up artifact card you own in exile, put that card in your hand. Again, you cannot look at a card outside the game. You cannot look at their sideboard, but you still are able to -2 and tutor up a card. So maybe there's a card that does something negative for them and you need to put it in there. I don't know why there would be, because it's not like you want to add a exile graveyard effect. You don't want to bring back a Tormod's Crypt and then Tormod's Crypt your own graveyard, because as that player that you're controlling, they probably have a bunch of artifacts that they want to return with Karn anyway, albeit there are probably like Eldrazi cards that you could probably exile and then they permanently don't have access to those. So that's also a benefit as well. Just be very careful with the artifacts that you're choosing to exile in case they have some type of bring back effect, or they've already used it out of the Karn wish board or something like that. I don't know. If you're grinding against Karn the Great Creator, kudos to you. That's all I'm saying. I don't think there's many decks that can actually grind against Karn the Great Creator. So just note that you can use half of this ability. Be very careful with what you get. I don't know why you would use it. There are situations though. Someone in the comment section down below, let me know give me some made up scenario in a game of Modern where you cast Emrakul the Promised End against your Karn the Great Creator opponent, you -2, and there's some type of card that they could reasonably play that you want to put back in their hand. Someone let me know. Someone let me know. I don't know. I don't know what it would be. Someone let me know. Regardless though, let's go into ranking the cards in total here. So all 7 Mindslaver style effects ranked, in my opinion, from 7th, as in like not that playable in my opinion, to the most playable at the top. Some of these are a little mixed, but I think we can get there. So Mindslaver, I have this down here because it really is an honorable mention. It really should be number 1. So I'm just getting it away off the top. Like, this is the iconic card. It's obviously just going to be like number 1 at the top. So I don't even want to bring it up. I already did at the kind of close to the intro of the video. Mindslaver is iconic. It's really only played in like 1 or 2 decks when it comes to constructed play in Modern, and doesn't really see much Eternal play past that. But when it comes to Commander, yeah, there's going to be artifact decks that look to abuse stuff like this. But even then, it's like you're in a 4-player pod. You're just controlling the next player. So unless you have a player that's about to like go off and win and you just want to like stop their turn, that's cool too. But you also probably want some like artifact recursion in that sense too. Like you probably, like if you're going first, you want like the 4th player in the pod and then you just get like 2 turns in a row. It's a little weird, right? So you want to be careful of effects like that. Sorin Markov used to be like a menace in Commander. The big thing with this was that it came down on 5 or 6, I should say, and target opponent's life total just became 10. You just like functionally did like 30 damage to an opponent in a Commander game that was at like 40 life. So that was like the big threat of Sorin, but it also had that rare -7 that it could live from, by the way, because you went Sorin +2 to 6, +2 to 8, you -7 on that 3rd turn. Sorin still has 1 loyalty. So theoretically, it could still live. You controlled target player during that player's next turn. And the +2 is Sorin Markov deals 2 damage to target creature or player, and you gain 2 life. Honestly, it was like a semi-reasonable creature. It like soft protected itself. It had the -3 to just deal a bunch of damage. It said target opponent's life total became 10. So it's not like if you were behind and at like 2 life, you could target yourself and like go back up to 10. I think like if it could do something like that, it'd be like really cool. But yeah, it's like a really overcosted -7. It's at the bottom for a very specific reason. Next one is Word of Command, which is a card that I think not a lot of people have heard about whatsoever. This is a card that, look, very confusing. It's a wall of text, very limited use of when you can control your opponent, but it's essentially black instant. You look at target player's hand, you cast a card from that hand, and it, like, if you're able to, and you can tap mana any way you want to cast that card. So you can then choose the targets for that card. So for example, you can Word of Command someone at instant speed to like grab a lightning bolt out of their hand, then cast their use their command tower to then cast the lightning bolt. I'm thinking about a commander scenario. Use the command tower to cast the lightning bolt and then target the lightning bolt at one of their own creatures. So I'm using the command tower because that's like a 5-color, like a multicolor land instead of like maybe one of their mountains or whatever. And so you unoptimally use that mana. Word of Command lets you look at their hand, so you get that information, but then also it only allows you to cast like 1 spell out of their hand at that moment. Again, it's just very weirdly worded. You get to control that opponent for as long as Word of Command resolves and for as long as that card is resolving. So there's like a lot of things happening with this, but very niche, small window opening for a card like Word of the Command. Let me know if you've actually heard of this card and where you're using it. Currently it's legal in Legacy, Vintage, Commander, and Oathbreaker. But let me know if you're using this in Commander, and I'm actually really interested to hear if there is a world where someone is using this in Legacy. I'm actually really curious where you would, because further up the list, there is a much more Eternal playable card that has a very niche window of when you can use it, but is just as powerful when it comes to that. So Worst Fears is probably like the most common one I think most people have come across. This is like one of those like big dumb cards that you know, came out in Standard. It's just the premium example of a card that you can't use in Standard, but you use in EDH way back in 2011 when people just had that mentality of like the format wasn't like ultra optimized, so you could just use your big dumb cards. 8 mana, black and 7, you control target player during that player's next turn, exile Worst Fears. The reason it's like down here, I just, you know, it's not instant speed obviously, but the fact that you have to exile it is really tough. And it costs so much, but you are in black. So if you're playing like mono black, then you're gonna have like Cabal Coffers nonsense going on, Magus of the Coffers, whatever. Like you're generating a lot of mana usually in colors like that. So it's probably not that bad there, but the fact that you have to exile it, kind of poop. But regardless, pretty powerful effect. They don't get an extra turn after that, like Emrakul's the Promised End, but really powerful there. This card is one less, and it's kind of funny when it comes to politics. So black and 6 for cool entertainment is sorcery. Choose target player and another target player. It could be yourself and another one, or just player 2, player 3, whatever. The first player controls the second player during the second player's next turn. So let's say player 1 and player 2, you pass the turn, you cast this card. The next player, you choose those 2 next players going. This player number 2 controls player number 3 on their turn. Player number 3 controls player number 2 on their next turn. So player number 3 now controls player number 2, right? And then the second player controls the first player during that first player's turn. So they each like swap the turn order in terms of how they control each other, and they get to just like ruin their own turns. So this card I find is actually really powerful for like a turn cycle. I think it's kind of funny, especially in mono black, where you can like get up to these shenanigans of like messing with your opponents, not only their board, but getting each other to do it. That way it's like not y'all can kind of mess with yourself and destroy each other's boards. And it's kind of a way to like soft eliminate like 2 players where they're just like, this is your hand? No, do this, tap out. And then they don't get a choice to respond, because then they're tapped out and then they can't. And it's kind of like even more powerful for the second person that gets controlled, because then the first person that gets controlled gets all their stuff tapped out, and then the second player can like respond the most, right? Because now they can like do other things, but then that, to be fair, that player probably tapped out with that information is then going to control that next player. So there's a lot of like funky things that can like happen when it comes to that. I'm really interested in like a cruel like a pod that just looks to cast these type of spells and just control everyone like in different ways. What if you're under like a Mindslaver lock? I don't know. It's really weird. There's some weird things that can happen, but cruel entertainment is a fun one for sure. Emrakul, the Promised One, we're now getting into the idea of really like playable ones. So again, just kind of going from the top here. Mindslaver is number 7, 6 is Sorin, 5 is Word, 4 is Worst, Cruel is number 3, and then number 2, Emrakul, the Promised End. This is the card that we've gone over plenty of times. Again, flying, trample, very much a win condition in itself. In terms of the battlefield, protection from instants makes it just protected from a lot of things. Obviously, this can be board wipe, so in Commander, this is a lot worse, but in a constructed environment where board wipes are a little bit like few and far in between, a little bit more niche, something like this is really powerful, and then just kind of costing less for what's in the graveyard. Me as a mill player in Modern Mill, I've come across plenty of these reduced to like Oblivion. It's like an interesting card. It's not the worst in the world. A lot of times, like in constructed decks, like a lot of them have, like if you're a quality versus, if you're a quantity versus quality deck, and the way I kind of get about that is a quality deck is one that's a combo deck that requires a specific sequence of cards to go about. But if you're a quantity deck, maybe something like Jund, where you have like a bunch of redundant threats, you may not care as much about something like this because they may not be able to use up all your mana effectively. You still get your turn back and you might be able to draw into something that's still really powerful. So Emrakul, the Promised End, has a lot of like mixed viability, but it can still do a lot of work even if your opponent gets the turn after that, on, you know, kind of on top of all those effects. But number 1, the best control your opponent effect, in my opinion, and this is obviously in a higher power setting, in constructed environments, in Legacy, in high power EDH, in CEDH, Opposition Agent, absolutely insane. So black and 2, creature, human, rogue for a 3/2 with flash. You control your opponents while they're searching the libraries. Folks, when they are fetching, when they are tutoring, you control your opponents when they're searching the libraries. while an opponent is searching their library, they exile each card they find. So you control them while they're tutoring. So if they go for a fetch, the fetch land, Polluted Delta, you exile their Watery Grave that they grab. You may play those cards for as long as they remain exiled, and you may spend mana as though it were mana of any color to cast them. That's the beauty of something like this. If you tutor, you can tutor for any card, exile it, and now it's yours, as long as the opposition agent is out. If they fetch land, you can grab that land, you can play that land. Beautiful. Opposition agent is just one of those like lockdown cards, and again, in high power formats where people are going to be fetching, in multicolor scenarios, in multiplayer scenarios in Commander, where lots of people are going to be tutoring, doing this, doing that. Opposition agent just being able to be flashed in is so powerful. Definitely one of my more favorite just disruption effects that exist in Black. This was, I mean, Commander Legends, like, this was just one of those contentious cards. Like, this was one of those cards that when it was revealed, it was like, this is a good card. This is a good Magic card. But again, definitely on the more sweatier side of things in terms of when you're using it. If you're using this in a Commander game in a low power table, probably has like zero value unless you have like Field of Ruin effects, because if you played Opposition Agent with Field of Ruin effect, you'd still get that effect and be able to play cards from them. So that's kind of really powerful. And kind of Soft had like a idea for like a Dimir Mill build that I made a video about it a while ago, where you played like Field of Ruin anyway, but then like you would like play Dimir for not only like Fatal Push and stuff, but you would like play Opposition Agent, and then you get in these scenarios where you could like Field of Ruin them and like take their lands and all that stuff. It's an option, it's a thing, but regardless, I think Opposition Agent has a lot of viability when it comes to that. So that's ultimately where I'm going to end off my video. What do you think about these 7 effects that Mindslaver your opponent in Magic the Gathering? Have you played all of them? Have you discovered any new ones? Have I said anything dumb or stupid in the video like I do in every other video? Let me know what you think in the comment section down below, and let me know if you're excited to be controlling your opponent with a Mindslaver effect in your next game of Magic, whether it be Commander or Constructed. Let me hear your evil ways.